very proud to be here tonight to introduce my nephew to you, Kevin Hill, who's going to talk about his work with asylum seekers to the United States. But before I do that, and before I officially introduce Kevin, I'd like to introduce who he brought with him tonight. I think most of them, this is their first Jewish service, so I'm really excited for them to be here tonight. Next to Kevin is Sister Teresa Bangard. She is with Little Sisters of Charity. Just Google her name. This woman is amazing, and the picture I will always have in my mind is this session of the legislature. She's been a tireless fighter for children's rights, for immigration rights, and many other, the death penalty. But the picture that is in my mind is this session of the legislature where she went before a committee to testify. Let me tell you, many of the committees this year in the legislature, you're lucky if they give 24 hours before the hearing for the hearing. So she gets there to testify. There are no proponents for the legislation, which basically, in very simplistic terms, says we will support ICE in whatever they do for whatever reason. And there was only one opponent to the legislation, and it was Sister Teresa. And she got up to speak, and they said, "I'm sorry, you haven't given us 24 hours notice." So they didn't let her speak. There was no one else there to speak. So the picture, the big headline picture in the paper was Sister Teresa sitting there, not being allowed to speak. It was pretty astounding. But she is an amazing person, and we are very honored to have her here tonight. Next to Sister Teresa is Kevin's daughter, Isabella Hill, who is an 8th grader. He has 2 school-age children. The junior in high school did not come tonight. And he has 3 adult children, one of whom who came tonight, Sophia Hill, who is a medical student at the University of Kansas. And next to her is his wife, Ellen Hill. So we're very happy to have all of them here tonight. Now on to tell you a little bit about Kevin before he speaks. And of course, now that's all gone off. Okay, here we go. Kevin is a graduate of the University of Kansas School of Law and has served as the elected county attorney for Brown County, Kansas since 1993. In addition to his work as a prosecutor, Kevin is founding board member of a social justice organization in Atchison, Kansas, that's interfaith organization called Atchison United, and is also a founding board member of I Care Ministries, a ministry that serves individuals with special needs and their families in the Kansas City area. Kevin currently serves on the board of the Kansas Coalition Against the Death Penalty and the advisory board of the Catholic Mobilizing Network in Washington, D.C., whose mission is abolition of the death penalty and the promotion of restorative justice. He has served as a pro bono attorney for immigration asylum cases since 2019. He currently lives in Atchison, Kansas, as I've indicated, with his wife and school-age children, and as I said, is the proud parents of all. He is going to talk tonight about asylum. Asylum is when people seek to come to this country because things have become so awful in their home country. So if these stories are pretty horrific, so if you feel that might upset you or you don't want to hear those stories, I suggest you step out for a while. But he's going to tell you exactly what he has encountered as a volunteer asylum attorney. So welcome, Kevin Hill.
So thank you, Karen, and thank you to the congregation for inviting me to speak on a topic that is near and dear to my heart. So key passages of the Torah address our call for immigration justice, and it's rooted in the Jewish experience in the land of Egypt. In the past year, Jewish and Catholic religious leaders have spoken with an increased sense of urgency about the need to address immigration justice. You know, this letter that was signed by, I believe, 600 Jewish clergy is, in my opinion, the best letter from religious leaders addressing the need to act now. And I won't read the whole thing from you, but it basically discusses the fact we're not here talking about open borders. Nobody that I know of is advocating for open borders. Nobody is advocating for us not having reasonable immigration reform. But the current administration, and as the leaders announced, this is intended to instill fear. It's intended to overwhelm communities. And the wonderful sentence at the end I just love, and that is, when a government loses the thread of the ideas that anchor it, its law and its institutions can be weaponized as a source of abuse and not justice. In addition to our Jewish brothers and sisters, the Catholic bishops, including our local bishop in Kansas City, Kansas, Sean McKnight, issued a joint letter on immigration on August 14th of 2025. And they mention what we're experiencing and what we can see just by turning on the news, and that is unnecessary raids, mass detentions, family separations, and they betray the values of our nation, as they indicate. And we're called with one voice to affirm the sacred dignity of every human person. So it's beyond politics, it's beyond Democrat, Republican. What we're talking about is human dignity and the fact that we are all created in the image of God. So what I'd like to do tonight is just discuss and try to bring a human face to the immigration issue and immigration justice. And it's based on my experience working in a place called Dilley, Texas. And you may have heard of the Dilley Immigration Center. It's been in the news quite a bit lately. Dilley is located in Texas. It was previously known as the South Texas Family Residential Center. It was actually opened in 2014 and was the largest family immigration detention center in the United States. At the time I was there, the capacity was at 2,400. It was actually closed in 2024 in anticipation of what we experienced last year in 2025, and so it opened again in March 2025, and it's known as the Dilley Immigration Processing Center. In case you're wondering where it's located, it's in the southern part of Texas, about 85 miles from the Mexican border. The week I was there, it was 107 degrees. Due to fracking, the water is not drinkable, so we were told that volunteer attorneys that went in and social workers were told to bring bottled water. And what was interesting and kind of, obviously disappointing and tragic is the fact that the attorneys, the guards, the staff were all drinking bottled water, but all of the individuals being held were required to drink from the local water source, which was contaminated. Dilley's been in the news a lot. Here are just some recent headlines over the past year. There was a family from Russia that was actually detained and placed in Dilley, and as you see in the bottom headline, even in Russia, they don't treat children like this. But inedible food, nightmares, worms and porridge. It was a horrendous facility. I'm sure most of you have probably seen this photograph of this cute little boy wearing his bunny hat. I think this picture, when we look back, and history looks back at this era, this picture will probably be one of the most important and widely circulated photographs. Thank goodness for our legal system standing up and doing the right thing, but as you can see, the judge actually ordered their release. Unlike what you may have heard, they were not, and I hate the term illegal aliens, they were not illegal. They were here lawfully, and they were following the established protocols for asylum. They had presented themselves to the United States for asylum, and were in the process of that, and were living, and as you know, he was attending preschool up in Minnesota, And the judge had very strong words, and I love the conclusion that he had in his opinion, and that is the genesis of this ill-conceived and incompetently implemented government pursuit of daily deportation quotas. Apparently, even it requires traumatizing citizens. So what does Dilley look like? First off, I didn't take the photographs. It was actually unlawful to take photographs of it. I've found these through other individuals that took these prior to them making it unlawful. The administration described it as a summer camp. I've never been to a summer camp like this. It was a prison. When we arrived each morning, we were all searched, metal detectors. Attorneys were not allowed to have cell phones, computers. We would just take in the old legal pads, and that was it. And then we would visit. And actually, we're not allowed to have crayons. And I'll tell a little story about crayons later on for the kids that we saw. So the families that we saw at Dilley, at the time I was there, it was only women and children, and the children were under 18. There were no male individuals that were held. Most had crossed the southern land border just very recently. Most were from an area called the Northern Triangle, and I'll give you a little background on the Northern Triangle, but that would be Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. I also had clients from Cuba and Nicaragua during the time I was there. In the week I was there, I saw 45 to 50 women and children in the week that I was there. And there were a team probably of 9 other attorneys that were there with us. So if you do the math, I mean, there was a lot of people that we saw. The Northern Triangle, recent civil wars. What was interesting at the time is they had war zone level murder rates. And I never, until I went down there, I really didn't understand. I knew about El Salvador and the 3 sisters from Mary Knoll that were murdered years ago, and I knew about the civil wars. I had no idea the murder rates were the way they were. 3 of the top 6 in the world were in the Northern Triangle. And a lot of it, as we learned, were because of civil wars. And unfortunately, our country had some involvement in those civil wars and has some responsibility for what had happened. All 3 countries are controlled by gangs. I'm familiar with MS-13. I have to admit I was not familiar with something called Mara 18 or Barrio 18, but they control a large part of the countries, and they control the police, and the government turns a blind eye to them because they are so powerful. Their main source of income is extortion, but they're also involved in the drug trafficking and kidnapping and murder. And so with that background, that's where a lot of these people are living, and a lot of the people are fleeing. So the process that we're in, these people are escaping violence in their country. And so at the border, Border Patrol, when they would find them, were there to deport them through something called expedited removal. And they were able to pause this by stating that they had a credible fear of being harmed if they returned to the home country. So by doing so, they're entitled to what we call a credible fear interview at the asylum office, and those were held at Dilley, Texas at the time. If they pass that, they're able to stay and present their full asylum case. If they don't, they're deported immediately, and they will face, obviously, the torture or death that they were fleeing from. I'll just briefly cover credible fear, but credible fear is basically a 10% chance that a person will be persecuted in their home country. So it's not like our criminal standards of beyond a reasonable doubt. It's basically a 10% chance that somebody's going to be persecuted. And that sounds low. I mean, when you see it on paper, it sounds really low, but if you look at the bottom of that, in practice, the success rate was between 3 and 5% on asylum in immigration courts between 2016 and 2020. And a big reason for this is the prosecutors in immigration court are employed by Department of Justice, and likewise the judges are employed by Department of Justice. So the fear is they have quotas on how many they can grant in a year instead of looking at the merits of the case. So what is asylum? And is it legal? And when I told you I'm not fond of the term illegal alien, seeking asylum is legal. It's in the law. It followed the atrocities of World War II, and then Congress has adopted those under the Refugee Convention. So seeking asylum is legal. And what most people don't know is that you must be in the United States or a port of entry in order to apply for asylum. So in other words, you cannot ask for a visa in advance for the purpose of seeking asylum. So when people come across the border and they go straight to a border patrol office to apply or a port of entry to apply, they're doing what they're supposed to do in order to apply for asylum. So on the children and the women and children I saw at Dilley, most of them actually reported to the Border Patrol. They were not rounded up like you see on TV in the Rio Grande or any of those. They were presenting themselves as they were supposed to. All of the women I saw and all the ones my colleagues saw were placed in something called an hilera or ice box, which was extremely cold, cinder block building. They were only given a foil blanket and then denied showers. After they were there for several days, then they were transferred to a tent facility and then exposed to extreme heat. Obviously, this caused a lot of medical issues, and so about 90% of the women and children I saw were sick to one degree or another, and I'd say 90% of the attorneys when we came home had to get medical attention because of getting what we had been exposed to. So while they were at Dilley, they were basically waiting for their credible fear interview and then would remain detained until those were heard. And when you look at how many were being held, 2,400 people being held, the delays were tremendous. And so that's what we were there to assist with, because they have no right to counsel. So without us assisting them, they were asked to, they would be asked to deal with a very complex area of the law in a language that they did not speak. After the service, I brought the brief I actually filed, and we call them brief, and everybody laughs at it, especially my kids helped me put together that brief, and so, about that thick, but if you think about, I've been through law school, I've had training, I've been in a courtroom, and I'm doing this as a pro bono attorney. The statistics are about 20% of people do not, only 20% will have a legal counsel, and the rest, 80%, do not, and they're doing this on their own in a very, very complex area of the law, and literally their life is depending on it. Here's a leaked photo if you're wondering what an hilera looks like. This was one of the first leaked photos of what these facilities look like. So very, very horrendous conditions. This is a photograph somebody took. These are the women waiting in line. The building on the right is the legal, basically the legal building that we would go into, and that was a line of people waiting to see us. They would allow us in at 8 a.m. every morning, so we were there at a quarter till in line, ready to go, and then no matter where we were at in the procedure, 7 p.m. we were out. So for that week, we would arrive, and there's no way, they would say, well, you can leave for lunch, or you can leave. There's no way any of us could leave when we'd look out and see the people out there. So we would stay that entire time to work with them. Briefly just go through some of the elements. So you have to have a well-founded fear of persecution, has to be on a protected ground, and so I won't get into a lot of detail on that, but basically race, gender, religion, or your connection to somebody else And then this was important, it has to be at the hands of the government or an entity that the government is unwilling or unable to control, and then they can't relocate within their country. So the job we had with all of these women and children waiting was to meet them for the first time and then have them just pour their hearts out on the horrendous things that were happening, knowing that we'd love to spend 2-3 hours with them, but knowing we had all of these women and children waiting on us and we only had a limited period of time. I had a wonderful lady that helped me with interpreting, because I'm not fluent in Spanish, so I had a wonderful lady that did this by phone for me every day and did it for the entire period of time without a break. And it's one of the most difficult things. In my profession, I'm used to dealing with highly traumatized victims, but nothing like this. I had to win their trust in 30 to 45 minutes, have them tell me about some of the most horrendous things. Meanwhile, their child is sitting right next to them because there's no daycare or anybody to watch. And so they're coming in seeing some, big white guy that doesn't look like them, who looks like I probably work for the government, and had to win their trust in that short period of time, knowing their life depended on it. And if I did not succeed, they were going home facing torture and death. So let me go just through some facts, just some of the cases I handled, just so you get an idea. And again, if it's triggering for anybody, the reality is people are fleeing violence, and so violence is what we dealt with. And so this was a young lady from Guatemala. The gangs start recruiting boys when they're around 14 in the middle schools to join. And then the way they join, we don't have many people that want to join gangs in these countries. It's not something they seek out to do, but the gangs are very effective, and so they will threaten to kill family members if they refuse to join. And so in this case, my client's neighbor, the daughter, mother, and granddaughter were all murdered by the Barrio 18 when the brother refused to join the gang. And then some horrendous things happened to the daughter as a message not to talk. In this case, her son was beaten and the family was threatened, and they were able to leave, but they only had money for the father and the son to leave. And so my client and her daughter were forced to remain behind. They were hopeful that with the son and father leaving, they would be left alone, but they were not. And so in this case, they went into hiding. The threats continued, and then she finally was able to flee with the daughter. So in this case, we were able to win a finding of credible fear to protect her. We also had in El Salvador, really terrible death squad that was facing them. Again, they would torture victims. The husband, again, and the son, this was very common. They would leave, and then the wife and children would have to stay behind because there wasn't money for them to flee. She thought this would basically protect her, and then as you can see from the facts, she was at home, looked out the kitchen window, saw members of this gang with the police chief's son, and then their family dog they found from the front door. So they fled, and then they were able to make it. And so if you remember the map of where these countries are located, and just think of the journey that these people had to take in order for them to escape here, it's heartbreaking to think about what they go through. I mean, they travel hundreds of miles, they're exposed to all kinds of danger on the way, and they come here, and to be treated the way we're treating is just, it's heartbreaking, because they're all God's children, and they deserve our compassion and our understanding, and really not what we're seeing today. Just a couple more case studies that we're on time. I won't go into too much on this one, but These were from Dilley, Texas, the ones on the case studies that I have here. This is like something out of a Netflix special. I mean, you've seen like on Narcos or something where this case from Honduras happened, and again, they were able to hide from the cartel. This one I remember specifically because she had her son with her, and I was talking about the crayons. We weren't allowed to have crayons, but I kept having these children sitting with mom as mom talked about just horrendous things that happened, and no child should have to hear all of that. And so I try not to break the law too much, but I did sneak in some crayons. And so I have a legal pad that was with me, and I asked him to draw me a picture. And so afterwards, I always bring that picture. I have it hanging on my office wall, but you know, when you were in first grade and second grade and your teacher asked you to draw a picture, I'm sure most of you drew a house and you had the sun and you had smiling family members and your family dog. And on his, he drew a rain cloud raining on him, and he had an X over his mouth, and just it was just heartbreaking to me, the message being don't talk. And then instead of sunny, it's rainy, and it was just it's just heartbreaking. So I keep that on my wall in my office as a reminder of you know what they go through, and some of the bravest women and children I've met in my life, and just to keep inspiring me to do better and not take for granted what I have. So this is the Aurora Immigration Detention Center, and I know somebody mentioned their son was a municipal judge in Aurora. So this is where Immigration Detention Center and the court is located. It's a huge complex. This is where individuals are incarcerated while they are waiting for their we call them merits, but basically a trial. There was an article written on my case from a publication in Denver, and I have a copy of it here, but in it I repeat what a practitioner told me when I started doing pro bono work, and he described the asylum merits cases as death penalty by traffic court. And I thought, how appropriate. I mean, what a great description, because it was like a traffic court. We had about a 2.5 hour hearing, rules of evidence not strictly abided by, constitutional protections really aren't existing. And so I had 2 hours to present my case, and I'll go through the facts on my case a little bit, knowing for a fact if I did not prevail, my client was going to go back to a certain death in Nicaragua. So knowing that such huge stakes existed and we were there without those protections was heartbreaking. So this was the case in Nicaragua. He was basically a musician for a religious. What was difficult on this is that we had to get supporting information from Nicaragua to support his claim for asylum, and all of the meanwhile, while he was being detained in prison, I had very limited access to him for doing this, and I actually met him for the first time in person the day before his hearing. So I'll skip through a few of those. Essentially, we are called to action. We're all children of God, and we're called to speak out about treatment of our immigrant brothers and sisters. And just as we were strangers in the land of Egypt, those fleeing the violence and terror in their home countries are strangers in our country, and they deserve our compassion, they deserve our love and understanding, and not our administration's scorn and anger. So let's let our voices calling for immigration justice be heard from the mountaintop, and just remember that we are all made in the image and likeness of God, and they deserve our compassion, and they deserve us speaking out on their behalf.